Colorado Territory. 1878, the sun had just broken over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains when Flint Zeller dropped his saddlebag beside a row of fresh pine coffins outside the town of Esperanza. "Graves are out back," the undertaker muttered, not even glancing up from his ledger. 3 by sundown. Flint gave a short nod, jaw tight. He had not come to dig holes. He had come to disappear. He had been a cowboy long enough to know when a trail had run out. After his mother passed that spring, and his last ranch job turned sour, Flint drifted through mining camps and cattle towns until he wound up here, broke and bone-tired. The only job open was grave digging, and he took it without asking pay. By mid-morning, sweat streaked down his spine and the shovel bit hard into the sun-baked earth. The grave markers were plain wood, still blank. No names, just numbers on the undertaker's list. Flint did not ask questions, but the third grave that one made his breath catch. The coffin was already buried, half covered actually. The dirt was uneven, rough, like someone had started and then stopped. "Damn it," Flint muttered. He bent low to fix the crooked lid and heard it, a sound, faint. Like a gasp swallowed by dirt, he froze. Then dropped to his knees, ear pressed to the coffin. Another gasp. Then a scratch. A thump. "Hell, someone's in there," Flint breathed, already clawing at the loose dirt with his hands. His heart slammed against his ribs. He shouted over his shoulder, but no one was near. The undertaker had gone inside, and the street was empty. He dug faster, flinging soil aside until the lid was clear. The latch was rusted shut. Flint pulled his knife from his boot, jammed it into the seam, and wrenched the lid open. He stared. A woman lay inside, her face gray and slick with sweat, her chest rising in ragged breaths. Her eyes fluttered open as he leaned over her. Hey, you're all right," he said quickly, voice low and steady. "You're all right now." Her lips trembled, eyes glassy and unfocused. She clutched something at her throat, a small silver locket. Flint's blood went cold. He knew that locket. It had belonged to his mother. He reached down gently, fingers brushing the chain. It was the same worn silver, same faded engraving on the back. "To Clara with love. You." "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice rough. The woman blinked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Clara gave it." Flint stared at her, heart thudding. His mother had died only 4 months ago. He had buried her himself by the creek east of Cimarron. "Can you sit up?" he asked, sliding an arm behind her shoulders. She nodded weakly, and he helped her out of the coffin, setting her down on the grass. She gasped at the sunlight, her thin fingers gripping his shirt. She could not have been much younger than him, maybe 23, 24. Her dress was torn and dirt-stained, her boots missing. "I need to get you inside," Flint said. "What's your name?" She was quiet a moment, then said, Etta Rosewood." Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes were steady now, brown with a flick of gold in the sunlight. There was something in them, something sharp and tired, like she had fought her way back from something no one should ever come back from. Flint lifted her carefully, one arm under her legs, the other bracing her back. "You're safe now, Etta," he murmured. "I swear it." He took her to the small room behind the undertaker's, where a water pump and cot stood. The undertaker raised a brow, but Flint's voice was firm. She was buried alive. Someone meant her to die. The man paled and backed out without another word. Etta drank slowly, her hands shaking. She would not say much, only that she had woken in the dark, no air, no sound, just the crushing weight of dirt above and wood at her back. She had screamed until her throat bled, then scratched, then prayed. "How did you come by that locket?" Flint asked once she had rested. She looked at him, then touched the pendant. "I was near Cimarron last spring. Your mother, she found me. I was sick, lost. She gave me this, said I should keep it close." His chest tightened. "She never told me." Etta's voice cracked. She said you were out driving cattle. She made me promise to leave before you came, said I wasn't safe. Flint sat back, staring at the floor. What happened after that? I tried to get to Kansas City. I never made it. Someone took me. I do not know who. I woke up in that coffin. He looked at her again, closer this time. Her face had bruises along her jaw and her wrists bore torn skin, half-healed. She had been through hell, and she had his mother's locket. That night, Flint stayed outside her door, shotgun in lap. The streets of Esperanza were silent, but he did not sleep. In the morning, Etta sat on the cot, brushing her hair with her fingers. Flint handed her a clean shirt and trousers from his saddlebags. She dressed slowly, wincing at every movement, but when she stood, she met his eyes. I want to know who buried me, Flint nodded. We will find out. They walked side by side through town. People stared. A woman covered in bruises and dirt and a grave digger with a shotgun. But Flint did not care. Etta never let go of his arm. At the general store, the clerk went pale when he saw her. I remember you, Etta said quietly, stepping forward. You sold me a comb. 2 men came out behind me. You looked away. The clerk stammered, backing into the shelves. I did not know what they were doing. Who were they? Flint asked. I do not know names, but they worked for Judge Merrow. He has land north of town. Flint's jaw clenched. That bastard's got half the county in his pocket. Etta's eyes burned with something hard and cold. He tried to bury me alive. I want him to answer for it. Flint looked at her then, really looked. She was still pale, still bruised, but she stood tall, her chin high. She had not broken, not even close. He reached out suddenly, resting a hand over hers. You are not alone in this. She looked up, surprised. Then her fingers turned under his, holding tight. Something passed between them. A quiet understanding. A promise. They were going to find out who had done this, and they were going to stop it together. The trail to Judge Merrow's land was a rutted wash of old wagon tracks and wind-flattened sage, running north out of Esperanza past dry gullies and scattered cottonwoods. Flint led the way on foot with his rifle slung low, boots stirring dust with every step. Etta walked beside him, clutching a bandaged hand around the handle of a borrowed satchel, her gait still uneven but steady enough not to ask for help. They didn't speak much on the road. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just full of thought. Each mile brought more questions Flint hadn't dared to give voice to. But he didn't press her. After what she'd come through, he figured she'd speak when she was ready. They reached the outskirts of the Merrow property by late afternoon. From a distance, the ranch house looked more like a courthouse, 2 stories of milled stone with dark shutters and a red slate roof that caught the sun like a blade. A windmill turned slow beside the barn, its creak rhythmic and hollow. No livestock in sight. No ranch hands moving about. Etta shaded her eyes. Too quiet for a place this size. Likely cleared out anyone who'd ask questions, Flint said. We'll go around. They circled wide, cutting through a dry thicket of rabbit brush until they reached the rear of the property. The rear porch was shaded, with a narrow service door cracked open just enough to show a sliver of the hallway beyond. Etta's fingers closed around Flint's arm. There's something I need to find. What is it? She hesitated. Before they put me in that box, I heard them talking. One of them said Merrow keeps records. Names. Girls he's paid for, ones he's sold. Flint's expression didn't change, but his grip on the rifle tightened. Then we find those papers. Inside, the house smelled of tobacco and dust, the air stale from long, sealed windows. They moved slow, steps soundless on worn floorboards. Down the hallway, a study door stood ajar. Flint motioned Etta to wait, then edged forward and looked in. Empty. He stepped aside and let her enter first. She crossed the room without hesitation, going straight to the desk. The drawers were locked, but she knelt and pulled a thin pin from the hem of her sleeve. A few seconds later, the latch gave. Flint raised his brows. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. She sorted through the drawer quickly, pulling out papers with a sharp efficiency. These are ledgers. Names, dates paid, some marked with crosses. She turned one page, then another, her face going still. There's mine. Flint took the ledger from her hand and saw it. Etta Rosewood, purchased, transferred west. No destination listed. A floorboard creaked behind them. Flint moved fast, swinging his rifle toward the door just as a man charged in a stocky ranch hand with a length of pipe raised high. Flint blocked the first swing with the stock of the rifle, then drove his shoulder forward, knocking the man back against the doorframe. The pipe clattered to the floor. Etta moved in behind Flint, grabbed the ledger and slammed it hard into the man's face. He staggered, dazed, and Flint took him down with a single punch. They bound his hands with a curtain cord and left him slumped in the pantry. Outside, the sky had turned to copper. Long shadows stretched over the plains as they moved quickly back toward town, cutting crosswise over old sheep trails and dry creeks. Flint carried the ledger tucked beneath his coat. Etta walked ahead now, her stride more certain than it had been all day. At the edge of Esperanza, Flint stopped. "We can't take this to the sheriff. Merrow's bought him twice over." Etta turned back toward him. "Then who?" "There's a circuit judge rides through twice a month. He's due tomorrow, stays at the boarding house." She nodded once. "We'll wait." That night, they stayed in the livery's loft. Flint laid out a spare blanket for himself near the ladder, while Etta curled up in a pile of old horse blankets near the hay wall. The wind moved through the slats, and somewhere below, a mare shifted and sighed. Etta's voice came quiet through the dark. "I had a sister once, younger by 3 years. She died of fever before we left Missouri." Flint turned his head toward her. "You came west alone, not by choice," she said. "I was sent to work for a family outside Dodge. When the father died, the son sold off what wasn't nailed down. I was the last thing standing. He didn't speak right away. Then, how long were you with them?" "Long enough to learn how to pick locks," she said, voice flat. "But not long enough to forget what it felt like to be free." He sat up slowly, resting his arms on his knees. "You carry yourself different than most folks I've met." She didn't move. "You mean like someone who came back from the grave?" "No," he said. "Like someone who knows what matters." Etta didn't answer. But when he lay back down, she shifted closer, just a little, until their shoulders nearly touched. Morning brought the judge's arrival as promised. They met him at the stables before he could dismount. Flint handed over the ledger, explained what they'd found and who had tried to bury Etta alive. The judge read in silence, his mouth set in a grim line. "I'll need to gather a federal marshal. This'll go beyond the county." Etta stood tall beside Flint. "We'll testify." The judge nodded once. "Then this town's about to change." Later, when the sun stood high and the judge had gone to the sheriff's office to begin proceedings, Flint and Etta sat on the porch of the livery, shoulders brushing, watching the dust swirl in the street. Etta leaned her head back against the post. "You didn't have to stay with me, I know. But you did." He looked at her, brown eyes steady. "I reckon I will for a while yet." She didn't smile, but her hand reached for his, fingers curling slow and sure around his palm. He didn't let go. The boarding house sat a block off the main street. A long, 2-story clapboard house with faded shutters and a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind shifted. Etta leaned over the balcony rail on the second floor, watching the morning take shape in the street below. Quiet riders, slow wagons, the distant clatter of tools from the smithy. Flint sat behind her in the room they'd been given, oiling the action on his rifle with a cloth torn from the hem of his old shirt. "They're going to want your word in front of half the town," he said, not looking up. "I know. "You sure you're ready for that?" Etta turned slightly, her voice calm. "I didn't survive a coffin to stay quiet." Flint set the rifle aside and stood. "Didn't figure you would." She crossed the room and laid her hand against his chest, fingers tracing the seam of his shirt where it had been patched with dark thread. "What about you?" she asked. "What happens when this is over?" He reached up, his hand covering hers. "Don't know yet. But I'm not leaving you behind, if that's what you're asking." "I wasn't," she said, letting the silence carry the rest. The hearing was held in the unfinished church near the edge of town, the only building that could hold as many as were expected. The walls were still rough plank, the windows empty of glass, but the pews had been borrowed from the old saloon and lined up in two neat rows. The judge took his place at the front with a ledger in hand and a federal badge pinned to his coat. The townsfolk came in slow, most keeping to the back, watching with wary eyes. Etta stood when called. She kept her shoulders straight and her voice steady as she spoke of the men who'd taken her, of waking in darkness, of clawing through soil. She did not cry. She did not falter. She looked Judge Merrow in the eye when the judge motioned toward him and said, "That man meant me buried." Merrow didn't speak. He just stared at her, jaw clenched, until the judge read from the ledger names, payments, transfers. The room fell still. Flint sat 3 feet behind her, watching every face. He didn't need to speak. Etta's words were enough. When it was over, the judge ordered Merrow held and his property searched. The town stirred like something long sleeping had been kicked awake. People whispered. Some wept. One woman stood in the back and said her niece had gone missing last spring. They walked out through the side door into the late afternoon heat. Etta's hands trembled once and then stilled at her sides. "I need a moment," she said. Flint nodded and stepped away, giving her space beneath the cottonwoods that edged the churchyard. She didn't follow him when he walked to the edge of the corral behind the livery. Instead, she sat on the stump of an old fence post and watched the light shift through the branches. When she finally spoke again, it was from behind him. "I thought after all this I'd feel clean, like it'd be over." He turned toward her, his voice quiet. "It's not over, but you're not buried anymore either." "I keep thinking of your mother," she said. "She saw something in me I couldn't see myself. One decent person, that's all it took to keep me alive." Flint stepped forward and cupped the side of her face, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheek. "You did more than survive, Etta. You came back. You faced them. They'll never forget that." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a long breath. "I don't want to go back east. I thought I did, but I don't belong there anymore." He nodded. "You belong where you're known, where someone's waiting for you." Her eyes met his, steady and clear now. "Are you?" "I've been waiting since the moment I heard you in that grave." She didn't speak, just stepped closer, their foreheads brushing, arms folding slow around each other. The wind shifted again, lifting dust in lazy spirals and carrying the scent of cut hay from the field beyond town. That night, they didn't return to separate corners of the loft. They curled together beneath the slope of the roof, the lantern turned low. Etta's breathing slowed as she rested her head against his shoulder, her hand tucked over his heart. Flint didn't sleep for a long while. He watched the rafters, felt her warmth pressed against him, and let the steady rhythm of her breath settle something deep in him that had been restless for years. Outside, the wind quieted, and the town held its breath, as if waiting for a new shape to take hold. The sun bled orange over the San Luis Valley when Flint unlatched the stable gate and walked Etta out toward the edge of town, past the blacksmith's forge and the half-built schoolhouse where the walls still stood bare to the weather. The judge had wired Denver that morning, and a pair of marshals would be arriving inside the week to escort Merrow for trial. Esperanza had gone hushed since the hearing, like the sound had been knocked out of it. Doors stayed open now. Eyes, too. Etta adjusted the wide-brimmed hat Flint had found her at the mercantile. It still sat awkward on her head, the crown too tall, but she wore it like she meant to keep it. Her shoulders were easier now, the tightness that once lived in her spine gone quiet. "You ever work land before?" Flint asked, watching a cluster of crows hop along a fence line. "Not honest land," she said, "but I can learn. There's a claim about 5 miles east of here. No one's worked it since the war. Old rancher lost both sons to Gettysburg, never came back to it. I passed it last spring. Water, spring-fed pond. Big enough for 2 horses, maybe a dozen head of cattle if we get lucky. Soil's not rich, but it'll hold beans and squash if we rotate right." Etta folded her arms, watching the distant ridgeline. "Sounds like something we'd have to build up slow. Everything worth keeping is." They walked until town drifted behind a low rise and the road turned to grass. Flint stopped there, near a cottonwood twisted by wind, its bark pale and furrowed like old knuckles. "I won't speak around it," he said. "You could leave. Take one of the marshal's wagons to Denver, start fresh with no one knowing your name." She studied him, silent. "But if you stay," he went on, "I'd like us to build that place together. Slow, honest, and real. I've never made a promise I couldn't keep, and I'd like to make you one." Etta stepped close. Her voice was steady. "I've been waiting to hear a man say something like that without expecting anything in return." "I don't expect anything," he said. "Except maybe your company when the roof leaks." She smiled, but it didn't reach her mouth. Her eyes held something heavier. "There's still things I remember, from inside that box, things I might carry a long time." "I don't mind carrying things," he said. "Long as I can carry them beside you." She reached for his hand then, not quick, just certain. Their fingers fit like they'd been waiting for it. She didn't pull away. "I want to see that pond," she said, "and I want to plant those beans." They spent the evening gathering supplies. Flint traded his last wages for a used plow blade and a small iron cook stove. Etta picked out a sack of seed and 2 tin mugs. They slept in the loft again, this time with no distance between them. Etta had brought her mother's shawl from the boarding house, and when the night air cooled, she draped it over both their shoulders, her head tucked beneath his chin. "You ever want children?" she asked, voice low. "I wouldn't know how to raise one right," he answered after a beat. "But I'd do my damnedest to try." "I think I'd name a girl after your mother," she said, her hand resting over his. He kissed the top of her head, slow and sure. She'd have liked that. By the week's end, they rode east with a borrowed wagon and a pair of mules that looked half blind but walked true. The trail was soft from rain 2 nights before, and the wheels cut clean through it. They passed a line of elk near the foothills, and Etta leaned forward, watching them move with the quiet grace of something untouched. When they reached the edge of the abandoned claim, the land opened wide beneath the pale blue sky. The pond still held water, cattails rustling along its southern edge. A broken fence traced part of the pasture, and beyond it, the bones of a cabin waited half-fallen beneath a leaning pine. Flint helped her down from the wagon. She crouched to touch the earth, fingers digging into the damp soil. "This'll do," she said. "We'll need to set posts before the ground bakes," he replied, "and clear out that cabin." "I'll start with the hearth," she said. "You can take the roof." That night they lit a fire beside the pond and boiled beans over the coals. Etta carved a notch into a piece of ash wood and said it would mark the first day of their claim. Flint leaned back against a rock, watching the smoke curl into the stars. "You still wear that locket?" he asked. She nodded, unfastening the chain and slipping it into his palm. "I want it to stay in the house," she said. "On the mantle, so we both remember where we came from." He held it a moment, then kissed the silver and laid it gently atop his jacket, They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The wind moved soft through the grass, and the night wrapped around them like a promise already kept. The cabin took shape by increments, not all at once. Flint drove nails with a hammer whose handle wore down smoother by the day. Etta sealed the gaps between logs using clay and straw she packed with calloused hands. The hearth caught its first smoke by midsummer, and the scent of pine ash clung to both their clothes one morning. After a long night of rain, Etta found wild mint growing along the creek. She knelt to gather it, fingers wet with dew, and called over her shoulder, "This'll steep well come winter." Flint looked up from the fence post he was setting, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "We'll have to dry it right, hang it from the rafters." She smiled without turning. "I know how to do that." By the end of July, they had a roof that didn't leak, a door that stayed shut against the wind, and a bed frame Flint had carved from aspen, notched by hand and set against the back wall. They slept there together, the mattress stuffed with cat ale down and burlap, their boots placed side by the threshold. One evening, while the beans simmered and the sky turned the color of copper ore, Etta sat cross-legged on a split log and held out her hand. "I want to show you something." Flint sat beside her and she unwrapped a scrap of flannel. Inside lay a handkerchief, carefully folded, and beneath it, a small stitched pouch. "This was sewn into the lining of my old dress," she said. "I didn't remember until I went through the satchel yesterday." Flint waited as she opened the pouch. Inside were 3 gold coins, dulled with age, and a folded slip of paper. She passed it to him. He read it slowly. The handwriting was feminine, precise. Clara Zeller's. "If you found this," it read, "then you are still breathing, and that is enough. Don't waste what you've been given. Give it away. Give it to someone who will never forget you." He folded it again, careful not to crease the edges. "She meant it for you." Etta nodded. "I think she knew I wouldn't leave this territory. Not really. I kept telling myself I was heading east, but something held me here." Flint didn't speak. The crackle of the fire filled the quiet space between them. Then she said, "I want to use it to buy seed, chickens. Maybe even a dairy cow come spring." He looked at her, eyes warm. "That's what I'd have done with it." "No," she said softly, "that's what we'll do with it." They used 1 coin to purchase a dozen hens from a woman near Canijo's who raised them for barter. Flint traded fence wire for a rooster and 2 sacks of feed. The rest they kept sealed in the bottom of a flour tin, buried beneath a layer of cornmeal. In early August, Etta built a makeshift clothesline between 2 posts, and they washed their linens in the creek. She sang low as she worked, just a few lines of something Flint didn't recognize. When he asked, she said her sister had made it up when they were children, something about the river and the stars. "Sing it again," he said, rinsing his hands in the basin. She did, and this time he joined in on the last line. Their voices didn't match, but it didn't matter. By the second frost, they had harvested squash and dried beans hanging from the rafters. Flint built a pen for the livestock with what scrap wood remained, and Etta started knitting by lanternlight, wrapping herself in wool she'd unraveled from an old blanket. One night, as the wind pushed against the walls and the fire burned low, Etta leaned her head against his chest. "You ever think about not having to fight anymore?" He rested his chin against her hair. "Every day. I think we're finally there." He kissed the crown of her head. "I know we are. That winter, no one came looking. No lawmen, no old debts, no ghosts. Just snow, quiet and deep, and the sound of their breath rising in the stillness. By spring, the fence held strong, and their first calf stood on wobbly legs near the pond. Etta named her Fern. Flint carved a cradle from pine with a smooth rock as a plane. In early May, the midwife from La Jara arrived in a wagon with a kettle and cloths. A storm rolled in from the west, and the wind howled through the cracks. But by morning, the air had stilled, and Etta held a baby girl swaddled in the shawl that had once belonged to her mother. They named her Clara. Flint sat beside the hearth, the locket now hung from a nail above the mantel, watching the fire dance in the stone. Etta leaned against him, Clara sleeping at her breast. She whispered, "We built this life with bare hands." He nodded. "And we'll keep it with them, too." Outside, the pond rippled beneath the morning sun, and the cottonwoods swayed gently in the breeze. A pair of doves settled on the fence, wings folded close. The house stood firm, its windows lit by the soft glow of a new day. And there, in the quiet steadiness of love earned and peace kept, they lived the rest of their days together, whole, and never afraid again.